So welcome. If you're looking for the design engineering information session, you are in the right place. We're going to go to our next slide. We can do some introductions. I can go first since I'm talking. My name is Bryce. I am a recruitment counselor within the Division of Masters and Professional Programs. You might recognize me if you've attended Belong at Brown or some of the office hours or advising sessions. I'm always happy to chat with students if you have any questions about the application. And I'll hand it to Tori. Oh, you're muted, Tori.
Thanks, Bryce. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you could join us today for our session. My name is Tori Riccitelli, and I am the program specialist within the MAID program. I provide the academic and administrative support for our wonderful team and students here in our program. And I think Jonathan is not on, so looks like Griffin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Griffin Van Horn. I am the maker in residence and the technical instructor with the main program. I work closely with the professors that lead the core studio courses for MAID students. And I like to say that I help you guys bring your ideas to life through digital fabrication and electronics prototyping and design for manufacturing. Rich?
Hi, friends. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Griff?
I can hear you. We can't see you, though.
Okay. Well, I'm probably a face made for radio anyway. Good to see everyone, or in this case, not be seen. My name is Rich. I am a professor in the program. I'm the co-director along with Jonathan. I also teach undergraduates design engineering, and I teach in the Prime program, which is innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm really happy to be on this call. And despite all my many degrees, I couldn't figure out how to make this call work, given that we have a power outage. So glad to hear you. I can see you. Thank you.
All right, if we're ready, I will move us to the next slide. And I'll cover the agenda. So we're going to go over some program highlights. Our wonderful faculty members will be going over the curriculum as well as some student profiles. And then I will discuss the application process at the end, and then we will have a Q&A. Great, and I'll hand it over to our faculty.
I can take this one. Yeah, so MAID is a joint degree program between Brown and RISD. So two universities, one degree with two names on it. It's an 11-month intensive program that starts in early July, and during that sequence, you take 4 core studio courses. And we'll talk a bit more about those later. The key, element of this program is we have students from design backgrounds and engineering backgrounds, and we focus on collaboration and kind of helping you guys learn to leverage all the intelligences in the room to kind of create synergistic interdisciplinary projects. Our core studio courses are taught by Brown professors and RISD professors with a wide variety of expertise. You can read some of those down here on the slide. We focus on design research, both qualitative and quantitative, and different aspects of that are focused on in different studios. We focus on real world iteration, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Yeah, and identifying problems worth solving is and bringing those to life is the why you hope it's why we hope that you would come to this program.
Griff, I can jump in. First of all, thanks for jumping in. That was a slide that I should have been able to cover. We are, as Griffin just said, we're delighted that you're considering MADE. We know you have a lot of choices and options. I think what's relevant and important to this call is trying to understand, one, if we're a good fit for you, and two, to understand how we differentiate ourselves, we think positively. And there's a lot of great programs out there. So this is not about trying to, convince you to come here. This is either going to sound like a good fit or not. I just want to elaborate very quickly, and we've got other things that we want to make sure that we leave time for your questions. Is the whole notion of bringing together people that already have strong tech backgrounds and already have strong, maybe creative backgrounds, and in the middle is a designer. So you could be a designer with an orientation or a background in engineering, but in the end, you think, I've seen the engineering part, I'm most interested in the front end or in the design aspects of it, or the other way. You could be deep in design, and a lot of you have come from design schools or at design schools or in design concentrations, but you think there's maybe something that goes the other way, that like, what are the mechanics? What's the process? What is the way in which either the application of design into a tech sector or a non-tech sector? What is that value that I will get from going to a design program housed in an engineering school? And then last, and Griffin already covered it because that's who he is. He's just covering for like the guy that couldn't figure out how to make the tech work. Is how do you leverage the power of both schools? And we'll get into more of the specifics in your questions, but we have a studio where you literally have a faculty from RISD and a faculty from a professor from Brown. So already you're getting insight and access to two different cultures and two different schools, both that I think are really, really good in their distinctive but different approaches. All right. Thank you.
This is a Jonathan slide that I can take if that works for you guys. The huge benefit of being a MADE student is that you have access to two institutions. If you're unfamiliar with the geography of Providence, Brown and RISD the campuses are directly adjacent. So you're steps away from two amazing world-class institutions. The MADE studio space itself is in the Brown School of Engineering at the top of the hill. And then as you go down the hill towards RISD, you'll walk past the RISD Museum and the Nature Lab, where we have a huge collection of specimens that can be checked out, kind of like a museum of natural history. But we have cutting edge technology there, like scanning electron microscopes to study biomimicry. In the School of Engineering, we have the Brown Design Workshop, 10,000 square foot makerspace where you have access to all sorts of digital fabrication and CNC tools. The professors, from RISD come from a number of departments, including industrial design and architecture. And our favorite part to highlight is you have double the friends, and you can form community with students from RISD in electives and from Brown as well. Rich, I think we're ready for the next slide.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yep.
We've talked a little bit about, we're going to get to this next layer. as you would expect from two world-class universities, not only do you have the faculty that are providing you a studio experience, but we believe that we're properly positioned to be able to tap into the ecosystem that exists here in Providence around design, tech, very specifically leverage some of the bio manufacturing and exciting things that are happening here locally. And then, as you know, because you understand geography, we're very close to Boston. There are classes that our students take at Harvard, at MIT, and some of those require a little bit of creativity. We have existing relationships, for instance, with Harvard. All of them, in both cases for RISD and Brown, allow us to tap into design research. So it's this ability to not just do whatever it is you were doing before you came here or considered coming here, but tap into ongoing research that is at the forefront. It could be at materials, it could be in a neuro field that you're interested in. It could be in something traditional, a construction, a product, a service. All of those things are evident in our research. And the other thing is, so if you look at this as what do I gain as a skill? The other thing we try to do is work on you. If you look at the bottom part of that slide is, how do you interact with others? How does your work communicate to the outside world? How does it communicate internally to shareholders and stakeholders, right? And it's not a business school. I know I just said the words shareholder and stakeholder, but it's just an understanding of where your design and your role fits. And then lastly, from a process perspective, it's iterative. And at the end of the day, we hope and we ask you to produce something, to take an idea into action. Griffin said, that is his facilitating role, and it absolutely is, right? Both as a very, very accomplished entrepreneur himself, but as someone who puts all that connective tissue together. We're a very hands-on program where we leverage the Brown Design Workshop and your own, and I'll close with this, your own things that are important to you. So you as a cohort will teach each other as much as we as the faculty or researchers or the ecosystem will provide. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we focus on real world design cycles, and that kind of takes almost a spiral approach where we start out in the summer with with kind of smaller scale design sprints, design engineering sprints, and challenges. Where you go through research, prototyping, implementation, testing, and starting the process over again. And that kind of takes different forms throughout your time with MADE, but the goal is that each one of those has real deliverables, and those will change. The focus on them will change, whether it's design communication, or your deliverable is a conference poster or academic paper, or in the spring, when you'll be presenting your final projects at the RISD grad show, alongside all other RISD grads to the general public, where it'll be seen by art critics and design journalists. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a kind of just a snapshot of that progression, going through those studios, make and measure in the summer. We do some design sprints. We focus on making skills, and we also the design communication course also meets during the summer and winter. so during that initial period in the summer, there are no other classes, no electives. It's an intensive session. Then in the fall, which was what our students are currently doing right now, we're focusing on iterate with intention. And our students are going through a lot of user research, working with professional stakeholders, and reaching out to people to consult on their projects. And that's a kind of a larger scale project, where you're starting to work more independently in defining your own problem and fully understanding, and then developing multiple potential solutions before converging on a final presentation and poster session, which the students will be doing shortly. And then in the spring, so design communication is summer and winter, and there's an intensive immersive winter session for 2.5 weeks during the winter. We'll be doing some site visits up in Boston and in Providence this winter, and we'll also be doing an intensive design sprint, which will culminate in a self-directed small-scale exhibition show. Then in the spring, that is a full semester-long project, where it's even more independent, and we focus on kind of furthering the polish and going through more and more design cycles to really hone in on a design that addresses a problem worth solving. And that, as I said previously, is culminates with the RISD grad show in May, which is a huge convention center scale gallery show that is fully student run.
And if I could add, Griff,
yeah,
go ahead.
And in the fall and spring, you'll also take 2 elective courses, which can be from Brown or RISD, because as a MAID student, you're registered in both organizations.
The way, so I happen to teach in the summer. That way I get to meet you as you get here as one of the co-directors. Really my intent is to do the back office to make sure that you've got the resources that you need to be successful. But I'm fully immersed with Monty, and we in our particular program, we start with game design. It could be any type of design, but it's always very interactive. In the students over the last couple of years have certainly enjoyed the quick introduction, unless you have a game background. But even then, Monty is a awesome instructor and has spent time at MIT and spent time working media and design. And the idea is, whatever you're designing, whether it's a product or a service, we ramp your way up. And Griffin accurately described how we're progressively building on your knowledge base. The second thing and the last thing I want to point out is that at each of these stages, you're going to get a different pairing of instructors. So it's not that you meet your homeroom teacher on day 1 and we carry you all the way through. And in that way, you get a sampling of our perspectives, our disciplines, our backgrounds, and our approaches. And I think that's a really refreshing for you as a student. And I like to think you're going to click with all of us, but we may have backgrounds that are more or less interesting to you. So that's a real way to expose you to different perspectives without limiting your ability to get the true diversity, variety, and interests that you need. And some of the skills which I just mentioned, this is not just experience to have experience. We want you to have these skills to take with you as you transition into your next stage of your career and personal and professional development. And at the Q&A, you can ask about any of these specific questions, courses.
My apologies, everybody.
No worries.
We're just your warm-up act. You got it, brother.
I got
These are
waylaid.
some these are some examples of the electives that students have taken in the past. So from engineering, I'll let you guys, I'm not going to list off everything, but you can see from an engineering perspective, there are a number of different courses offered through the School of Engineering at Brown, as well as computer science and data science courses. And there are, people, one thing that I like to correct students on is they say, oh, well, you go to Brown to Brown electives to learn the more technical side of things, and then RISD for the more creative side of things. But you can see computer science for social change and interactive computer graphics. There are some really awesome kind of some courses where you can get more creative through engineering. And same with RISD, there are a lot of very technical courses there. Biodesign Studio, Robotics for the Pluriverse. I'll let you guys read the full list. And then on the right, we have some kind of more specific subject matter arcs, progressions of electives that students have taken for environmental, health, and education. But that is to say, these are it is a choose your own adventure scenario, and these aren't formal tracks that students sign up for.
We just finished the registration process for this coming spring, and graphic design was a particularly popular topic for this current cohort.
And Jonathan, maybe you can just kind of mention about the elective process from the RISD side, or kind of the kind of how you might guide students that are looking to take a certain type of elective.
Yeah, so Brown and RISD have had a long-standing relationship prior to this program of shared classes. It is a little tricky because a number of, especially the fine arts classes, are reserved for majors, but the design division is pretty much open to any number of disciplines: architecture, interior architecture, landscape, apparel design, graphics, etc. A whole suite of courses that, we have to negotiate the two schedules of the two institutions, but basically that's been my role. Spent the whole day yesterday doing exactly that, is plugging students into available classes around the Brown Studio core.
Next slide, please.
The gang.
Yeah. Let's see. I can just highlight some of our amazing faculty. As we mentioned, the students come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and the amazing benefit of being part of both institutions is we have access to professors from an incredibly wide range of backgrounds. So Paolo is an industrial design professor, does a lot of work with design futuring. Tino Chow, design, branding, storytelling. He runs a design firm called Giant Shoulders. Ian Halpern, medical device, former IDEO. So he has a very interesting, diverse background. Sujung Ham is currently teaching the fall studio, has an amazing industrial design background, talks a lot about design for manufacturing as well, formerly at Gillette. Jonathan.
Myself. I'm a professor.
You missed the
intro.
introduction. Could you introduce yourself briefly?
Professor of architecture at Rhode Island School of Design. I'm also currently working on a number of biomaterial substitutes to plastic in the environment. And I'm the co-director of the MADE program along with Rich.
Amazing. And Louise, sustainability and engineering. She is the director of the Brown Design Workshop. So we have she is taught with our in our studios previously, and is currently serving as more of an advisor. She works, a lot of students are her TAs and her research assistants. She just got an amazing research grant to focus on sustainability in design education. Rich, you've met Chalky, computer scientist, works a lot with AI, has an incredible CV. Tori, you've met Monty, Rich mentioned recently, game design, leads game design boot camps, and kind of an incubator program to help game designers bring their games to life and actually turn them into viable products. And Elizabeth Sylvan, formerly at Harvard, and intersection of technology, AI, and ethics through the Berkman Klein Center previously, and now teaching with Chalky in the Prime program. And me.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier in what we all refer to as the Providence Brown RISD ecosystem, and you can see it in full effect here. Both schools are national, international institutions, but the ability to walk down the street and connect across disciplines is super important. I see Coast Guard listed there. The U.S. Coast Guard got its power back, so now you can hear and see me.
And a number of these organizations are actually also at RISD. Hyundai and NASA have longstanding relationships with the Industrial Design Department. Should we move forward?
I can just cover this very briefly. This is our amazing current cohort. As we said previously, we intentionally select a cohort that has a wide variety of skills and backgrounds, and we're looking for how well they can collaborate together, and trying to form those interdisciplinary connections through the makeup of the cohort. The average age 25, 45% international students. We have currently 25 students representing five countries.
And the students have a wide range of experiences, which we look for as well to build our cohort for the next time. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think that's a pretty good, most of our students have a couple years of experience from industry, and it's really amazing to see kind of how they bring that knowledge and that experience to their projects.
I'll chime in addition to their backgrounds, their experiences. I mentioned that you learn as much from each other as you do learn from us. I've had a lot of people reach out and say, hey, do you have time to speak? I certainly can. I recommend you reach out to them. I'm very impressed with how collaborative they are. They have to spend a lot of time together. And
I think something about their ability to, disagree, agree, and work long hours. You're getting 2 master's degrees in 1 year, so this is not an easy program. But it'll, get by with a little help from my friends applies here. So I think you're investing in the cohort as much as you are in the development of new skills. As you can see, their interests, it's a tough balance because you're only on campus for a year, and how much of that time do you want to spend thinking about what's next before you're done with what's right in front of you? And it's a trade-off, and it's easy for me to say you should be fully focused on, or us to say, on deep immersion. There is a time that you have to start thinking about what's next. If you do that too soon, you miss the opportunity to learn things that you might not have considered. But we do understand that there's all manner of things that you want to do once you leave RISD and Brown.
I can just cover this real quick. So these are these are some example student projects. But the kind of the domains listed below are the backgrounds that the students came into the program with. So this kind of highlights how interdisciplinary some of these teams are. So top left was a recycled textiles sustainable building materials project. Those students presented that work at a conference in France. That was a summer project. We have a game design project from the summer boot camp. The storybook was a kid's book that kind of highlighted the process used to generate it through AI. The recycled foam installation, another project from the summer. Chromacom was transparent OLED displays and a camera that would kind of block out distractions and as glasses, which was really incredible to see how much those students iterated. Treeborg this is an example of a piece that's being displayed at the RISD grad show. Those are biosensors connected to plants, connected to a mesh networking platform and an LLM to let these trees talk to each other, which was really great. That piece was also displayed at the MIT After Dark event a couple years ago. The Gath was a mindfulness companion built in VR or built for VR, and the interactive city data visualization project was an extracurricular project that a number of students worked on and this is on display or was on display at the Museum of Science in Boston, collaboration with the Berkman Klein Center, the City of Boston, data team, and the Museum of Science, and us, obviously. So that was a really exciting project to see come to life. But this just gives you a snapshot of kind of what some of these deliverables look like and what kind of collaborative background these students come from.
Griffin and Rich, did you talk about the grad show yet at all?
I did talk a bit about it, but if you want to add some context, I'm sure that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, it's been a tradition at RISD that all the graduate students show their final project at the convention center during graduation. So we basically take over the Providence Convention Center, and each grad student has a forum to show off and exhibit their work. And MAID gets a special little corner of the convention center for themselves, again, to highlight the final project from the spring semester. So it's a pretty great opportunity to showcase not only the graduate cohort have made, but also with everybody else, the graduate students across RISD.
Yeah, I think one thing that I have highlighted to the students about the grad show is every other program, the students are working on their grad show projects for over a year, at least a year. And we do it all in the spring semester. And I think that it goes a lot to show that we can create projects that deserve to stand next to some of these projects that have taken a very long time to develop through the power of interdisciplinary collaboration.
Okay.
I think, Rich, can you speak to this slide?
I sure can. I've already talked a little bit, and I hope it's not that we sound repetitive. I'm going to focus on on the examples, right? I've talked about the ecosystems, I've talked about the regional, but if you look at what's highlighted, the very specific skills that sometimes aren't evident when you get here. It could be working on the design. I'll give you an example of a spacesuit. We happen to have a space science elective at Brown. So we're trying not to make it difficult for you to tap into existing efforts, right? Jonathan mentioned RISD and Hyundai. So whether it be getting to you at a Hyundai elective or getting you into these very specific collaborations that, while you could do somewhere else, we're not collaborating with people that are halfway across the country. These are people that are right here. And then the faculty collaborations extend beyond those faculty that you're in front of. I'll give you an example. We do work on the circular economy and sustainability through the Brown Design Workshop. Louise Manfredi, who previously had been connected to MAID, is a Brown faculty member who very frequently is in our classroom. So I think that there is a inner circle of faculty that you're going to have. And then there's just a whole host of people that enjoy, benefit, and are excited to engage with you as MAID students.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much. I can go ahead and take over here. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about Rhode Island and Providence. Both Brown and RISD are located within Providence, which is the capital city of Rhode Island. It is tiny but mighty. It is also the arts capital of New England, of the surrounding states, which is very exciting, and kind of the perfect place for this program. While it is a city, there's also a lot of green spaces that have been kind of reserved within the city, which I think is really lovely. So there's lots of parks. It's very walking friendly, biking friendly. A lot of people ask, do I have to have a car if I live in the city? And I don't think you do. That is my usual answer is no. There is lots of ways to walk around. You also get free ridership on the Rhode Island Public Transportation Authority buses, which we lovingly call RIPTA. So you'll get free ridership there, which will take you all over the city. There's also a Brown shuttle that you'll have access to that will bring you up and down kind of College Hill. There's all sorts of really fun, artsy things that go on. I know that RISD has an alumni craft fair that they host that I have been to that's really wonderful. There's also live music, live entertainers. Providence has a drum troupe that performs every Tuesday. Maybe not now that it's cold, but once it warms up, they perform on a pedestrian bridge over the river, and that is really fun. We also have the zoo. You get access to the RISD Museum, which I've also been to, and it is fascinating. It is a lot of RISD artwork, but then also it's just a museum as well, and it has some really incredible artifacts. I was really blown away by what was included in that museum. And then there's also the train to Boston, the ferry to Newport if you're wanting to venture outside of the city limits. It's pretty easy to get to fun different places as well. So I think it's a really excellent little spot. If we kind of zoom in, so this is a map of Providence and the neighborhoods within. Brown's campus is kind of immersed in the middle, and then it spans across neighborhoods. And again, RISD is pretty intertwined with the Brown campus. Most of our students live within these hearted neighborhoods, so downtown, Smith Hill, Federal Hill, Fox Point. And then it's kind of known as West Side versus East Side, but they're all so integrated that it's not really a versus. It's really just kind of a community. So there's a lot of back and forth between the two. Like there's really great thrifting in Fox Point, but then there's really good Italian food in Federal Hill. Like they each have their own kind of personalities, and it's really fun to explore them all. The next thing I wanted to share is our centers and offices. So resources that you have access to as a master's student at Brown. Starting with the Center for Master's Student Excellence that is located in 225 Dyer, where the School of Professional Studies is also located. So that's where my recruitment team is housed. That is where we work. And that is a really excellent space for any student development opportunities, connection and network events. And they also have a wonderful career services there as well. So you can do mock interviews, you can get resume help. They host wide events. You can get individualized advising, group advising, all sorts of fun things. Student health and wellness services are also available for you as a master's student that's on campus. And that is everything from, maybe you're feeling a little ill, you've got a bug, or maybe you need some mental health counseling. Graduate school is a tough time sometimes. And I definitely recommend reaching out to the wellness services if you feel like you need them. We also have the Office of Chaplains and Religious Life, and they host a lot of fun religious focused events and activities, but they also provide support resources as well, including things like grief counseling, or different, like this is a candle vigil, so different support resources there as well. We have the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and they have a bunch of different identity-based centers around the campus. So you can really kind of find your community there and find somewhere where you feel really represented. There's also the Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning. They offer writing tutoring, writing help. They are a really great resource for, research papers, anything that has to do with your projects within coursework. They are a really fabulous resource. And then we also have the UFly Center, which is for undocumented and first-gen students or low income, and they provide all sorts of really good resources. And we do a presentation with them as well, what you might not know as a first-gen student. So if you do want that recording, you can email us, masters_events@brown.edu, and I can get you that information. Awesome. So let's go into some more of those student support and academic services. So like I mentioned, we've got the Center for Master's Student Excellence. They offer academic counseling as well as career services. And then they also partner with our student affairs team, and they host a lot of really fun events. They've got a really broad spectrum of events that they do. They do some that are like lecture series, learn mini master classes, but then they also do fun social get-togethers. They've done kayaking, they've done goat yoga, they meet up at the brewery. So kind of all aspects of anything you could want socially, that's hosted with our Center for Master Student Excellence. And then we have the Sheridan Center. Again, they do tutoring, they have a writing center. They also have English language support. So if English is not your first language and you might need a little bit of help, they offer that support there as well. And I believe they also offer other language tutoring as kind of an extracurricular. I think they have Spanish, Arabic, sign language. I believe they have German, lots of different options. So definitely worth looking into if you're interested in learning a new language, whether it is English or something else. And then student support resources, we have a 24/7 administrator on call for emergencies. We have our student accessibility services, and they are great about making sure that all of our buildings are accessible. They also have a map on their website of the most accessible sidewalks and walkways to get from building to building, which I think can be really helpful. CAPS are counseling and psychological services. They are located within the Health and Wellness Center. We have our Office of International Equity and Diversity. Again, they host those different campus centers, those identity centers. They all have different houses around campus and host really fun events. And then health services as well. Cool,
Bryce,
so
could Bryce, please let me know next time goat yoga is happening.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to say if for the participants, if you guys have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we can be answering them live.
Absolutely. Cool. So career and professional development. We offer, again, those workshops on resumes and cover letters, creating your optimized LinkedIn profile, salary negotiations. We also offer that individual advising sessions to kind of help you plan your career. What are your skills and interests? What jobs are available that kind of match and align with those? And then we have our STEM specific career advisor as well. So she's really focused, on those STEM careers, on those engineering, the research, all of those different pathways. So it's nice sometimes to have someone who is really specialized in those career pathways. Our website is masterscareers.brown.edu. And then we also have different offerings throughout the university that aren't hosted by our Master Student Excellence. So we have career fairs. Handshake you will get access to Handshake, and that is the website that you'll use once you've been admitted and enrolled to look for job and internship opportunities. And that includes graduate assistantships, dining services, employment, the bookstore. You can learn more about that through our student employment website. And then Brown Connect is another really, really good resource that you'll get as access to as a student to connect with alumni. Brown is a big school and has been around for a long time, so there are a lot of alumni, and they are always super willing to help. So that's a really fun resource to have as well. And then within your department, you will have different advisors who can help you focus on your career as well.
And all of what you just said is true for RISD as well. We have a very
Wonderful.
robust career service, career support team, and very engaged with graduating students. So you get the best of both.
Yes, access to both, which is wonderful. All right, and now I will talk a little bit about the application. So this is a great screenshotable slide. It shows you all of the different requirements for your program. That priority deadline is coming up on December 1st, but then the regular application deadline is January 15th. So the difference between the priority deadline and the regular deadline is we are going to look at that. The program is going to look at that batch of priority applications first. They are going to evaluate all of those and release decisions in late January. But they will be offering student spots to people who are in that priority application group. So you really want to kind of get in there first so that you can really secure your spot before the regular deadline. The regular deadline, they will also still be looking at those applications, but there are going to be less spots available for the regular application deadline. So as always, our advice is to apply sooner rather than later. And then the final decision release will come out in early March, and the program starts in July. So for the requirements, we're looking for your transcripts. Those can be unofficial transcripts at first, but by the time you enroll and classes start, we will need those official transcripts. If English is not your first language and you did not obtain a degree from an institution where the sole language of instruction is English, then we do need your TOEFL and IELTS. In other words, if English is your native language, you don't need a TOEFL or IELTS. If you have attended a school and obtained a degree where English is the sole language of instruction, then you don't need the TOEFL or IELTS. It's only if you don't meet both of those requirements, then we do need to see your English language proficiency exams. Letters of recommendation, we're looking for 3 of those, and those are best when they come from someone who really can speak to your unique skills, someone who knows you personally and has seen how you learn and how you apply what you have learned. We're looking for at least 1 academic. If you've been in school in the last few years, we're hoping for 1 or 2 academic letters of reference. And then from someone like a professional supervisor, someone who's maybe led your internship or your research experience. Again, someone who can see how you learn and how you apply. We're not looking really for family or friends. This isn't a character reference. It's a reference for how you're going to be able to handle the responsibilities that come with graduate school. Your portfolio, we're looking to see your kind of design experience. And then your resume, we want to see that professional experience. You can also include there any research, any internships, any presentations, anything that you have done that you really want to showcase. You can add that on your resume as well. Your personal statement is going to be some short answer questions. Just be sure you're really answering those questions in the context of your motivation to attend this specific program and how it's going to tie into your short and long-term goals after the program. And then there is a video essay as well. Awesome. So I covered some of these details already. The transcript, you can start with unofficial, but official is recommended or required by the time you matriculate and start classes. Credential evaluation is required upon matriculation for international transcripts. And then our rule is that we want to see a transcript from anywhere you've obtained a credit from. So post-secondary degrees, post-bachelor coursework, we do want to see those as well. The TOEFL or the IELTS, these are our 2 accepted English language proficiency exams. So if your native language is not English and you do not have a degree from an English speaking institution, then we'll need your TOEFL IELTS. But if you do have either of those qualifications, then we don't. And that school code, this is another good screenshot slide. That school code is on the bottom, 3094. And then the letters of rec, again, follow the instructions of who you should be requesting these letters from. Make them early and be strategic. So you can have your essay questions, have your resume, have your portfolio, and provide those to your recommenders so they can really see the story that you're telling through your application, and they can tweak their letters to align with that. You can tell them, I really want you to touch on this project that we did or this skill that I have exemplified in your class or while working with you, and really highlight those skills that you want to share so it aligns with the story that you want to tell in your application. It is important that all 3 are submitted before the deadline. We cannot review your application unless it is complete, and a complete application includes 3 letters of recommendation. We have to have all 3 submitted. So make sure you're updating your recommenders for that deadline, and so that they have enough time to write that before the deadline as well. Awesome. I'm going to speak to the personal statement, and I will let the faculty kind of touch on the portfolio requirements. But for the personal statement, we're looking for about 1,000 to 1,500 words, highlighting why this program is the program to help you reach your goals, what experiences have shaped your worldview, your approach, and what strengths will you bring to strengthen the overall cohort? What are you bringing for your classmates? One of the phrases that another program director likes to use is iron sharpening iron. When you're in that cohort, you're learning from each other and you're learning together. So we want to be sure that you are bringing something to the cohort and you will be a classmate that can help your other classmates. You can also speak about where you want to improve, what skills you're hoping that your time with MAID will help you build. And then what are your goals? What are your aspirations? How is this program going to support your goals? and who you want to be. And then what have you learned from making things so far? Again, this is your story, but be sure it's connecting with that academic viewpoint, an overall kind of arching theme of this is why academia, this is why this program, this is why this career path. Yeah. And then I will hand it over to our faculty to speak a little bit more about the portfolio so they can share that expert point of view.
One thing that I think it's important to note is if you've been part of a team project or if it's individual work. I think it's really important to identify that it's your personal work or you're working with an institution, and if it was collaborative in nature. That's something we look forward to or look at.
I will also throw in there something that I'm always looking for is somebody who help students bring their ideas to life and make them functional. Be clear about if something is a rendering or a form exploration and a kind of hollow enclosure, or if it's a functional works like prototype. That is not to say don't include it if it's not a works like prototype. Just be clear about whether it's one or the other.
I'll chime in on your portfolio and personal statement. Make sure you tell us who you really are. I think there's a tendency, and I've done it, and I'm a professional student. I have lots of degrees and still couldn't figure out how to get online earlier. You're going to go to the place where you're a best fit. You should tell us who you are. We're trying to build a cohort. I wouldn't angst over, there's no perfect candidate. You might have some gaps, right? I noticed in the Q&A, hey, what if I don't have this? Well, just tell us, this is why you're coming, right? If the school, if you already had everything, I'm not sure you needed to come. So we should have something that you don't already know how to do, because that's our job, to give you that particular skill. So that's a perspective, just so that you don't approach this as a, hey, I'm not going to apply because I'm not the droid they're looking for. You don't know who we're looking for. Good people. They're going to collaborate well, that are going to go do great things that we can later point to you and say, hey, they came to our program. I'm being a little silly there, but don't self-screen out. Make us do our job. We'd rather get a ton of applicants and then make those hard choices. And by the way, all of you are going to get lots of options to lots of places. So that's what I would focus on. Those are all good questions, and I understand why you ask them, but there is no ideal candidate.
I will just add on one thing to what Jonathan and Rich said about collaborative items. I answered this in a question. Please, if you're thinking about including only independent projects or some collaborative, we love to see collaborative. This is a very collaborative program. And there's a benefit. It's not to say be clear about whether or not this is your work to try to dissuade you from including those things. Explain how you worked with people from different disciplines or who have different technical skills to solve a problem that you couldn't solve on your own, and tell that story. It's there. You have 10 pages. Don't list just 10 projects out with just a shiny picture of each one. Tell the story of how you identified the problem, how you worked towards solving it, and then show us, what the result was. I personally love to see the process, love to see the failures, love to see what you took away from that and collaboration is a big part of that. This might be a good time to plug the December info session as well.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I know we are just about at time. But we have our website, our LinkedIn, Instagram. If you do have those questions, you can send them to made@brown or masters_admissions@brown.edu. And I will hand it back to our program.
Yeah, we have, I think, do we have a specific date? Bryce, do you know that off the top of your head for the December portfolio info session?
I don't, but I can pull it up really quickly. And I can drop that registration link in the chat for you all. I just have to pull it up. It is December 10th.
December 10th. Do you know what time it is on December 10th?
Noon to 1.
Noon to 1, December 10th. And we'll go into any specific portfolio questions you have. There are a number of questions about kind of what if I come from this background? How do I highlight this? We'll kind of talk about this. As Rich said, tell us who you really are. Like we specifically select a wide variety of background. So we want to see who you are. We want to like highlight that, and we'll talk about a bit about that on December 10th.
Well, it's great to see everyone on here. I'm sure somewhere embedded in the 47 of you online, and cancel us out so we're not applying. Although I often tell my wife I want to come back as a MAID student. It's a cool program. I will find your application once we admit you, and I'll remind you to be the person you said you were going to be on your application. So a little bit of pressure there. Bye, friends.
Thanks, Rich.
Bye.